what is the best Malazan Book of the Fallen book from an unbiased, objective, and completely reliable source? Hello, welcome. I am Pete. This is The Ponderings of Pete. And I already said the other half because I said it backwards today. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I appreciate you stopping by. And yeah, if you like this video, please like it. And with the thumbs up button thingamajigger that everybody knows what it looks like. And then subscribe and, hit the bell notification if you really want to get notifications and, see my face more. Which is fine. If you don't, I understand. If you're coming back, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate you. You're awesome. Let's talk about what I'm going to talk about, which is my Malazan top 10. I mean, there's only 10 books, so it has to be a top 10, technically, right? Malazan Book of the Fallen, the 10-book series by Stephen Erikson. Will this be spoilers? Yes, it will. I do plan on having spoilers within each section on my thoughts, but I will also have everything marked in the description. So my ranking from 10 to 1. Check out the chapter markers down below. When I start saying a name, I probably will say the name and then say some random stuff that's non-spoiler. So you will have a few seconds, I'll say one or two, like one sentence or so, probably of non-spoiler. So yeah, you'll have a few seconds to click away and click to the next timestamp if you really want to know which of the ones they are. So let's get into what you came here for. With, of course, the one I like the least. I also want to say, I really do like these books, so if I say a certain book is the worst of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, that's the worst of a really, really good series. Malazan Book of the Fallen is definitely one of my favorite series of all time as I've discovered it, and it's definitely a very deep series, so I really enjoyed it. Without further ado, let's get into the ranking. First up, we have number 10, because we're going up, because that makes sense. And that would be House of Chains. This shouldn't be a surprise. I've kind of said a few things about House of Chains in the past, how it was kind of just disappointing to me for the most part. It made me angry to a certain extent as well, and that's also just a lesson for Malazan, in my opinion. I was annoyed at the ending. I felt like the ending where Tavor kills her sister was built up to be another great big battle, especially coming off of Memories of Ice, which is definitely not number 9 in my ranking. Going from the ending of Memories of Ice to the ending of House of Chains was a big change for me, especially because the endings of the previous 3 books, Gardens of the Moon, Dead House Gates, and Memories of Ice, all involved big battles. I was looking for another big battle. It was going to be awesome. There's a lot of elements I was like, I wonder if it's going to happen. And then Erikson just cuts the knees out from under me, and there's no big battle, and it ends with not a bang, but a whimper. And I was disappointed. I didn't entirely enjoy Karsa in this book as well. That first part of the book was really hard for me to get through, because I didn't really like Karsa. I thought he was weird, he was creepy, he was kind of a disgusting person. So sitting with him for a while was kind of hard for me. I did end up liking Karsa later on in the series for what he was, but I just think the start for Karsa is really rough. There was also this is one of I think the first one that I really got uncomfortable with some of the things that were in there. I can't remember the name, but the mage that just mutilated the genitals of all these women that I think were his either sycophants or just he kidnapped, I don't know. That really made me uncomfortable, and I was like, what is this weirdness? And if there was weirdness like that in the other books, I don't necessarily remember it, and it wasn't to that level for certain. So there were a few things in this book that threw me off, and the subversive nature of the ending really didn't sit well with me. That really was a lesson for me to not expect the same thing over and over again with this series, and it was a good one. So House of Chains is one of the ones that I may not be looking forward to the first part of House of Chains because of Karsa, but I'm definitely looking forward to the last parts of it just to go in with different expectations and really figure out if I like it for what it is, not for what I expect it to be when I do my reread. Next up, let's talk about number 9. And my number 9 is, not common with everybody else's. My number 9 is Midnight Tides. This is a fan favorite. From what I can tell, everybody loves Midnight Tides. I didn't. I think part of it comes into the overhyping. Everyone was like, this is so amazing. There's these characters that I love and great things. And I was just like, oh, okay. A lot of people seem to sympathize with not Ruth. Oh, I can't remember names. Coin Boy. A lot of people sympathize with Coin Boy. I'm going to call him now because I can't remember his name. I did not. I just saw him as a spoiled brat, and I never got around to sympathizing with him in this book. So, like, that tragic part of his character, I didn't get, like it didn't click with me. T-Hole and Bug were good in this book, but they weren't great. Like, everyone was like, oh my gosh, they're so great. And I'm like, this is kind of weird, and the Oblala stuff is kind of like, And yeah. A lot of with T-Hole and Bug, like, I wanted more from them, specifically with T-Hole, where a lot of it was like, T-Hole's so smart, and oh my gosh, and all this stuff. A lot of the stuff with the Letheri and T-Hole I felt was told to us, but not necessarily shown to us. We were shown some of what the ruling class is like with T-Hole's brother and the king and the mage. I can't remember what their actual title is. But that was just the ruling class. And then with the Adur, we got some of the effects of the Letheri, but we didn't see much of them, honestly, other than very extended second, third hand effects type of deal. While the descriptions of what the Letheri do were great, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so great, this is so bad, they weren't engaging because it was like second and third hand type of stuff, and then the ruling class. So like, the actual people we didn't get to see or understand or look into. And so it didn't like engage me as much as it could have. So that's why I didn't like Midnight Tides. I didn't connect with a lot of the themes as well at a certain point, because I was just like, I was confused by a bunch of this stuff because it wasn't, I just wasn't catching it. I was also coming off of House of Chains, so I was like, disturbed. This is another one that I'm looking forward to. It's not like the top one I'm looking forward to. Knowing more about this book, specifically the themes, and knowing more, just hearing people talk about why they love it more in a spoiler context, I understand a little bit more. And then knowing T-Hole and Bug from Reaper's Gale also will help in the future, I think, on a reread. So we'll see if this one shoots up. Number 8. This one is Gardens of the Moon. And Gardens of the Moon, the first entry, the entrance to Malazan. It's the OG, the classic, the confusion. The reason this one is so far down the list is because I don't remember that much of it, to be completely honest. I've gotten some refreshers by listening to some podcasts, like the 10 Very Big Books podcast, which is great. They're going through Malazan. It's an awesome podcast because they go through like section by section. So I remember more of like Dead House Gates and Gardens of the Moon now. This book felt all over the place for me as a new reader of Malazan. I just didn't know. Like, I knew it was going to be confusing, but like reading it and then hearing it's going to be confusing, like reading it is something else. So not understanding what was going on was tough. This one I'm excited to reread because it's just, there's so much in this book that I missed simply because I didn't know what was going on. And having read the end of the series and reading it with a new perspective is going to be the most exciting thing for me. Reading with the perspective of who was the actual narrator, reading it with the perspective of knowing where the stories for each of these characters end up, and just thinking about the arcs that they're going to go through is going to be very, very interesting. And going through it with the wiki is going to be interesting as well, because I'll be able to be like, I don't quite remember where this person's story ended up. Where did they end up? So, it's be cool. That'll be in like a few months. I can't remember if I think I'm read Carcanus after I finish up Path to Ascendancy. I'm not sure yet. I might, just to give a little bit of oomph to Rake, which will be interesting. Next up, we're going to go with number 7. And number 7 is Toll the Hounds. So, Toll the Hounds almost was overhyped for me. Definitely there are the detractors to Toll the Hounds. They're like, oh my gosh, it's so long and boring. Helped a lot to bring those expectations down, which was great. Toll the Hounds had some things that I liked. For instance, the Marines. I think consistently you can say that if there are Marines featured prominently in these books, I'm going to love them more. The exception being House of Chains, because I hadn't realized that. That's what I liked about the series until at that point in time. So I wasn't like, Marines can just tide me over in the weird parts. I love the Marine parts. I love the explosive ending that was wild. But it was a slog to get through. It was like brooding, and I wasn't a part. Like, I get the themes they were going for with the whole Idkovian. So the whole like Idkovian as the god that just accepts anybody. I get the theme going there. It still was a slogging of a storyline, as well as the stuff with the Tisti. I wanted to like it more than I did, but I didn't like love it. Definitely all the stuff in Darujhistan was the standout for the long parts of this book, because that stuff I was like, Darujhistan. And I was also, at the time I was reading this, I think I was also starting to listen to the 10 Very Big Books podcast, and they had gotten it, and I was listening to the Darujhistan parts in Gardens of the Moon. So listening to the Darujhistan and reading about Darujhistan, that was great. It was a nice little like, this is where they came from, this is where they are. It was cool. So, Marines, Darujhistan, I liked it. Next up, we have number 6. Number 6 is going to be the Crippled God. And part of me doesn't really know why. Like the Crippled God kind of just sits there for me. It was an interesting ending, and there's a lot of different parts to it, and part of me still just doesn't know how to feel about it. I don't know why. So it's sitting here in the middle, because I didn't have crazy strong feelings about it, but I didn't have any negative feelings about it either. I liked the insight into Vor. I did like the final scenes on the Spire. I loved the Spire race, even though I felt like that was the only time I really got to know Stormy and Gessler. Like, I didn't really note them before. Like, they may have been there in a lot of the other books, but it's not until the end of Dust of Dreams and then this one that I was like, Stormy and Gessler are actually pretty tight. So that was... I wanted more of what I didn't get. Like, I wanted more Quick Ben and Kalam, but I didn't get really that much of them, and I was waiting for them most of the book. And we got some of them, and they were great. And then we got the Last Stand, which was so great, but I wanted more of that in this book than I feel like we got. I liked the Greyhelm's parts, but I think for the end of the series, I just wanted less of that and more of Quick Ben and Kalam just kicking butt all the time. So it's more just like I wanted more of what I didn't get, but I did enjoy what I did get. Next up, number 5 would be Deadhouse Gates, book 2. Deadhouse Gates was one that I liked more and more on thinking about it more. Deadhouse Gates was one that sat with me for a while, partly because Deadhouse Gates keeps it's the second book. It gets brought up a lot more because people tend to get through 1 to 3 books. So they talk about Gardens of the Moon, Deadhouse Gates, maybe Memory of Ice, but mostly people, like new people, I feel like talk about. I just got a lot of Deadhouse Gates discussion and got a lot of stuff because I've gotten through that in the 10 Very Big Books. I haven't even gotten to Memories of Ice yet. But Deadhouse Gates had a lot of elements that I really loved with the Marines. I mean, not even there weren't really that much of the Marines, but the battles. And I think we got more insight into the magic that I loved. I say insight, but it's just like a random stuff, like with Kalam and the Deck of Dragons, and then we got the traveling into... I don't even know what realm, what warren they were in, but with where they met, like Gessler, Stormy, and Truth on the boat, the Edur boat that's powered by Headless Tisti, and the first glimpse of the Otataro dragon, that I was like, oh, this is interesting. That moment stuck with me because I was like, Otataro is like anti-magic, and there's a dragon made of it. What's going on here? And then Felison's story kind of was like one of the first kind of tragic stories that stuck with me, and it was a mostly complete story in Deadhouse Gates. So that was really interesting to me. Meeting Mappo and Ikariam was definitely like, ooh, interesting. So there was a lot of stuff introduced in this book that I really like, as well as there was 1 or 2 complete storylines, like the Chain of Dogs, that I really loved. So there's a lot of things in this book that just stuck with me that kind of put it above a lot of the ones that are below it. And number 4. This one, I think, is probably... This one and Midnight Tides are probably the ones that are the biggest deviations, I would think, from the fandom. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong. I'll probably say this again when I get to another book. But Dust of Dreams. So, I actually really like Dust of Dreams. I went in severely de-hyped for this one, which is funny. People are like, oh my gosh, it's terrible. I'm like, I don't know, is it? And Dust of Dreams, I think people don't like it because they don't necessarily feel like the pacing is justified, if that makes any sense. Does this book drag? Well, if you like the storylines, it doesn't, which I think is the same case in Toll the Hounds. But it feels like, oh, this is the beginning of the end, but only for the first 200 pages, and the last, 200 pages. And then the middle 400 to 600 pages, you're like, I don't know what's going on. Could be. Possibly. But the first couple hundred pages were phenomenal, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And everyone's like, the next 400 to 600 pages are terrible, and I'm like, are they though? This is actually a really interesting look at the Barghast and everything going on around that. I don't mind this. This is actually really interesting. And Tavor just trying to get everybody on their butt, and just that dread of going into the desert and being like, I don't know what's gonna happen in here. And then that battle at the end, which I thought most of the people at the battle were dead and weren't gonna show up at the end, show up in the last in Crippled God at all. I was like, oh my gosh, they're all dead. What happened? But I thought it was great. Definitely not a book people enjoy if you don't enjoy the Barghast storyline and you're just chomping at the bit. I think my chomping at the bit frustration definitely came into play in the last book, which was interesting, instead of this book, which I was like, all right, de-hype, let's see what I can enjoy about this. And I found things to enjoy. Mainly the Barghasts, and just that interesting look at their terrible culture. I mean, I would say that a lot of the Barghasts kind of got what they deserved a little bit, because they're terrible people. But it's also the erasure of a culture, and it's sad. Next up, number 3, Memories of Ice. Book 3 is number 3. Funny thing, this was the first book in the series that I absolutely loved. After reading the first, the first one, I was like, confusion. Second one, I'm like, interesting, still confusion. Third one, I was like, I kind of know what I'm doing now. This is great. I kind of knew what was going on with some of the god stuff. I kind of knew what was some of the warrens. I was like, ooh, and there's dinosaurs with swords and so many battles. Some of the things that I really loved about Gardens of the Moon and Death House Gates came into play here with the epic battles and anime feeling of this book, kind of really. There were some really great moments of just war and marines, and just they introduced Calor, which I was like, I don't know how I feel about you. Oh, I hate you. After Witch Ski Jack died. The end of the Chain of Dogs affected me. But this was the first book that a lot of things in the book kind of affected me. Specifically with Itkovian, Whiskey Jack's death, the death of most of the bridge burners. I was like, wait, that was wild, because most of the bridge burners are dead and it's only 3 books in. And so many people love the bridge burners. What's going on? I wasn't too satisfied with Tattersale's arc in this one. I was like, that's kind of weird. And it was random, but I'm looking forward to especially after starting to read Path to Ascendancy and seeing Tattersale in that. I'm kind of like, oh, interesting. How does this end, and how does this all fit together? We got a lot of Paran in this book, which I really liked, and that feeling kind of stayed throughout. I really like reading Paran's POVs. Yeah, just a lot of things I really, really liked in this book. The Siege of Capustan was amazing. So that's why I like Memory of Ice. And number 2, this is probably one of the most consistent picks I have for a lot of the people that I've seen, or the closest to consistent, I would say. And that is Bone Hunters. I've seen a lot of people put this as number 1. There's one particular book that I liked more, and you know what it is already, but Bone Hunters was my second favorite, because there's so many great things in this one as well. You have the Siege of Yigatan, you have the figuring out of identity. That's something I'm looking forward to analyzing a little bit more on my read with this one, just because between the arc in House of Chains and Bone Hunters, Tavor and the army are figuring out who they are. And I think that's such an interesting concept, because it sort of feels like a weird coming of age thing, because you have House of Chains where there's a build up, and they're children basically, and they want to do the thing, and then they don't get to do the thing, and then they go to Yigatan and they want to do the thing, and they get plastered and slapped, and then they get to Malaz City, and they're actually they've been through some hardship together, and they're like, yes, this is who we are. So it's not just a coming of age story for a single person, it's a coming of age story for an army, which is a really interesting concept that I love. And then Malaz City was awesome. It's no, we ain't gonna let you get after the Wiccans because you're being stupid, freaking surly. Anyways, and Tavor just being like, nah, I'm going to go with my army because I know what's going on. I still don't know how Tavor knew things after the crippled god. I think I'm going to have to go back and think about that more, because that's something that I felt like wasn't conclusively answered in the crippled god, or I don't remember it being conclusively answered. Like, you know, how'd she know? How'd she know about things? How'd she discover it? It might have been to Amber, because like to Amber is like the enigma that I didn't really know who the heck to Amber was until the crippled god, I think. And I was talking to some people, and they're like, yeah, to Amber's, and was Tamber Byrne? I don't remember who Tamber is right now, but I know she was somebody big, and I didn't realize she was somebody huge. So that might be the connection I'm looking for. Anyways, Bone Hunters, Kalam's fight scenes. Kalam's great, guys. Like, books with Kalam in it, I love. Deadhouse Gates, Bone Hunters, the Pieces of the Crippled God. I love it when he's around. He's awesome. And now, let's talk about number 1. That's the Reaper's Gale. Yep, this is one that's really, really, really different from the community. I've seen a lot of people with this as their least favorite. And I'm just like, but there's so many things to love. 1, you get Marines. Lots of Marines. Yes, do we know a lot of them? No, we don't. A lot of them are brand new characters or had 1 or 2 lines in like House of Chains or Bone Hunters. But this is where you see an army coming into its full, because Devor's just like, have at ye. And it's a little bit to keep track of them. And you're like, who are these people and what? And then Beak was painful. But like the campaign, Erikson did really well with. Not only did you had a map and you're able to kind of see where they're going, but you also know where the individual squads are in relation to each other. So you felt like you could see, I felt like I could see the campaign moving across the map. And I thought that was awesome. And then we have the Letheri. I think the portrayal of the Letheri culture is tons better in this one, because we actually see them doing things instead of being told, oh, the Letheri culture's so bad. We actually see them kind of doing the thing that we hate them for. There's some really terrible people that are doing some bad things, and you see their selfishness and their greed and how that contributes to the overall culture. You see T-Hole being T-Hole, not just talking about being T-Hole. Does that make sense? Like, you actually see him saying things to make people go doing this and that, and like, T-Hole and Bug are great in this one. T-Hole in this one, I felt like, had more manipulation time with everything, and you actually saw a little bit of it wasn't just jokey T-Hole, it was actually like, oh, I kind of care about people, T-Hole, instead of, I'm just endless jokes. After Midnight Tides, I think the Letheri storylines really just ramp it up. I think this is also the first one that I really started liking Karsa a little bit. I could get away with just pushing to the side some of his flirty talk, because it's really annoying. But him and the witches just banter outside of the flirty weirdness, just came across as rapey to me, was a great dynamic. I think that's really what Carson needed, was a good foil, I might be using that term wrong, I don't know, but a good, just a good character to like oppose him and be like, Carson, are you smart or are you stupid? Icarium and Mappo are still like this. Icarium scenes, I'm still confused about what happened at the very end of Reaper's Gale, especially going into Dust of Dreams. I'm like, what happened here? But again, this is another thing on the reread that I'm looking forward to. What was it, Red Mask? Yeah, the Red Mask storyline that led into some of the Dust of Dreams stuff, I wasn't sure about, but I think about that a little bit more now, and I kind of like it. It was random, but it was also another thing that contributed to the whole, like, here's showing what the Letheri are and how they're terrible. Not just, hi, the Letheri are terrible. It shows the effects of what they're doing instead of just telling us. So, Reaper's Gale, definitely my favorite. Definitely the one I'm most looking forward to, just because I want to see what I missed. I don't actually know. I mean, I say most, but I don't know what I'm maybe I don't actually know what I'm most looking forward to. There's a lot of things in this entire series that I'm looking forward to reading, simply because this is a series that's literally made for rereading, in my opinion, because, like, it's just, there's so much that you're not going to catch the first time around, or the second time around, or the third time around. You're just not going to miss it. So it's great. This is a series that's amazing for discussion and rereads, and yeah, I love this series. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, all that jazz, blah, all that stupid administrative stuff. I do have a Discord if you want to talk more. And thank you so much for watching. Make sure to get some rest because that is super important. You're awesome.